How does it feel to be a paradox? In a new book, Skip Gates profiles 7 African-American men who are by turns accomplished, iconic, or notorious, or all three. And in a chapter he wrote before the recent civil case verdict, he considers the response to the criminal trial verdict in the OJ Simpson case. It is here in a book about blackness and identity and other people's expectations. The book is 13 Ways of Looking at a Black Man. The author is Henry Louis Gates, Jr. He is chairman of the Afro-American Studies Department at Harvard University and a regular contributor to the New Yorker magazine and also a frequent guest on this program and never enough. Welcome back.
Thank you, Charles. Nice to be back.
Henry Louis Gates, Jr. was not born Henry Louis Gates, Jr.
That's right.
He was born Henry...
No, Louis Smith Gates.
Louis Smith Gates.
Louis Smith Gates, that's right.
So why do we change our name?
Well, we change our names to give ourselves a new identity. That's why we change our names. My father's name was obviously Henry Louis Gates, Sr., and I was the second son. My brother, Paul Edwards, an oral surgeon in New York, was named for both of the grandfathers, maternal and paternal. I was named Louis after my father and Smith after my mother's best friend, Miss Olivia Smith, who was obviously not going to have any more children. And in a moment of weakness, as my mother would put it, she promised to name the next child after Miss Olivia Smith. And so there I was. They hated the name Oliver. And when I went off to, after Yale, went off to England, to Cambridge, to graduate school. When I came back, I'd been thinking about it for a long time. I hated my name. I wanted my father's name. And I walked in and I told my parents that I'd made a decision to change my name, and they were delighted. And I did it with enormous trepidation. I don't know why. I know why, because it was changing my identity. I had to get all my diplomas changed, all my credit card, whatever credit cards I would have had, driver's license, my Yale degree changed, everything. But it was a chance to change myself, and it was important to me.
Is this book about identity? Is that what, in the end, it's about?
It's a book about identity. It's a book about identities. It's a book about the fact that there is not one way to be black, or one way to be a man, or one way even to be an American. It's a book about the false notion of authenticity, that we can somehow betray our social identity, or our social group, our race in this case, our ethnic group, by being ourselves.
Take that in terms of what Louis Farrakhan says, because you point out in here, and you say even with Skip Gates, that what he says causes some fear among black people as well on the notion of authenticity and how black you are.
Absolutely. I think that many of us are afraid that we will somehow betray the race, or somehow not live up to our obligations to our own people, not accept the responsibility that we've inherited to do good, as my grandmother would say, for our people, to make it better for people less fortunate than we are. And so we're always vulnerable to someone standing up, whether it's with good intentions or bad intentions, saying, you are a sellout, you are an Uncle Tom, you are a handkerchief head, you have betrayed our people. And my war is against those people. My war is against the bullies, ideological bullies. I hate bullies.
Yeah. You would have risen to defend Darden because he was on the receiving end of all that opprobrium by some people.
Sure. No, I'm not saying that people aren't beyond criticism.
Yeah.
I mean, Clarence Thomas, I criticize him regularly.
Yeah.
I think he deserves criticism, but I don't think he deserves demonization. And I don't think Christopher Darden deserved demonization. I don't think that...
Or to say that because he was prosecuting a black man, he therefore was betraying...
Sure, he was just doing his job. He wasn't betraying anybody. There are 35 million African Americans. That means there are 35 million ways to be an African American. There are 35 million ways to be authentic. And the ultimate authenticity is to yourself, not to a list of ideals that someone else has invented for whatever political purpose they've invented them.
All right, let me talk about some of these profiles, because I got a lot to talk to you about here. First of all, why this title?
Well, to explain, first, it's a famous poem by Wallace Stevens, and something anybody who went through Yale when I did was subjected to or exposed to Wallace Stevens' poetry. I happen to like his poetry very much, and I thought that it captured. I was doing this, the reaction to the OJ piece, in this fury, because I only had a few days to try to interview all these people. The verdict came down. It was a big event. I had a deadline, and so I was frantically trying to reach everyone that I reached and quoted in the essay. And I was astonished at how different the responses were. I asked everybody 3 or 4 questions. Where were you when you heard the news? Did you think he was innocent? Did you think he was guilty? Who did it if you thought he was innocent, et cetera, et cetera? And I realized that there was a multiplicity of opinion within the African-American community, and I could use this as an allegory about notions of authenticity and about the rumor, gossip, grapevine mill that I also wrote about in this piece.
This is from 13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird by Wallace Stevens. I do not know which to prefer, the beauty of inflections or the beauty of innuendos, the blackbird whistling or just after.
Ah, that's beautiful, or just after.
Or just after. This is what you said about the Simpson verdict. I myself was convinced of Simpson's guilt, so convinced in the middle of the night before the verdict was to be announced, I found myself worrying about his prospective sojourn in prison. Would he be brutalized, raped, assaulted? Yes, on sober reflection, such worries over man's punishment seemed senseless, a study in misplaced compassion. But there it was. When the verdict was announced, I was stunned. But then again, wasn't my own outrage mingled with an unaccountable sense of relief?
Mm-hmm.
Convinced he's guilty.
Convinced he was guilty?
Why are so
Still
many,
convinced he's guilty.
Why are so many, I'm asking just why, African Americans not convinced of that? Not that he is, but not the overwhelming number seem to believe contrary to you.
I think that the overwhelming number of black people now, after the second trial, might say that they believe that O.J. was innocent. But I don't think they actually believe O.J. was innocent. I mean, I do my own Gallup polls,
Sure.
right, in the community.
You talk with the brothers.
Right, and the sisters.
And the sisters.
And no one I know really thinks now that O.J. was innocent. The question was Mark Furman. The question was lynch justice, lynch law. The question was white racism. The question was our own vulnerability before the law. No matter how honest you are, no matter how secure you are, no matter how respectable you are, no matter how loyal and American you are, we were still vulnerable before the law. We are still vulnerable before the law. If I see a flashing headlight or a flashing light from a police car in my rearview mirror, I am petrified, man. I am absolutely petrified.
It's like me walking in certain neighborhoods in New York City, and if I hear steps behind me, I'm petrified.
Yeah, I feel that way in your neighborhood.
Yeah, of course you should.
Afraid one of the policemen are going to come and
well,
arrest
sure,
me.
that's the point.
And
that's the point of stereotypes.
Right, and that's what I tried to, but no, it's a point of historical experience.
Experience, right.
And remember in that same essay, I interviewed all these people, Cornel West, William Julius Wilson, lots of other people, about were they surprised about Mark Furman, and did they have, in their own past, have experiences such as those that he claimed that he did. And they all said, yeah. Bill Wilson called it DWB, driving while black, that you were always vulnerable if you were in a luxury car with the wrong kind of person, et cetera, et cetera. It is a terrible, terrible anxiety and burden to live under, not ever being allowed to be a full and equal member of the American society.
And that is at root to the reaction to
the verdict.
To the first verdict.
Yeah, that's right. I think that if it hadn't been for the revelations of Furman, the percentages would have changed quite dramatically. Look, O.J. was not a race man. O.J. is not someone well known for his service to the black community at all.
He was considered beyond race or something. What?
Well, there are a lot of people. I mean, Michael Jordan is certainly a hero within the black community and certainly does a lot of wonderful philanthropic things for the African American community. But O.J. did not fall into that category. He was not a candidate for a normal amount of sympathy from the black community, just the opposite. But the revelations of the LAPD were so terrible, so disgusting, that I think that it produced a backlash and it manifested itself in the way that it did. Look, it wouldn't have manifested itself for just any black person, anytime, anywhere, who looked highly likely to have murdered his wife, and his wife happened to be white. That's a mistake, and I think that's a mistake that the press has made.
And Vernon Jordan on Colin Powell, quoting to you, you do not have to hang out on the corner to be a brother. That's number one. Number two is you don't ask peers whether or not a guy's a regular brother. You ask the other brothers whether he is regular or not. You ask the guys at the airport, you ask the shoe shine boy. You ask the taxi cab guy, and they will tell you he is a good man. Over the past few months, I've asked them by the dozens, and they do tell you that. To use a word that keeps coming up, they're proud of him. Quincy Jones, a musician and producer, Kurt Smoke, the black mayor of Baltimore, told me independently about going with Colin Powell to South Africa. And my point is Colin Powell is a hero to everybody. And within the black community, there is a sense that he is, in fact, brother.
Well, yeah, I think that as people get to know him, as people got to know him near the end of his first faux campaign,
faux campaign,
as
right.
he came out of the closet as a person who supported affirmative action and as a not Clarence Thomas. I think the danger was, and many of us worried, that here was another Clarence Thomas in
What's
the military.
Clarence Thomas? I mean, I know who Clarence Thomas is, I know what he does, but someone who does not believe of the movement?
Someone on the hard right, someone who wants to dismantle entitlement programs, someone who finds affirmative action an embarrassment, despite the fact that they've profited so enormously from affirmative action themselves. Someone who is trying to reverse a century of agitation for civil rights through the courts, and particularly the Supreme Court, through liberal interpretations of the law, of the Constitution. That kind of person.
Why can't there be a big tent and support someone like that, even though he has a different view about what is the solution to America's problems?
Oh, it can be. In fact, if I'm of two minds by this. There are two realms that we have to talk about. If I'm putting together, let's say, a department at an Ivy League school, I could care less about someone's ideology. I want them to be smart. There's no ideological line to toe at in the Harvard Department of Afro-American Studies, for example. We'll hire people in the left, the center, the right.
Well, who have you hired from the right?
We haven't hired anybody
I didn't
yet,
think so.
but I'm looking all the time. We'll find somebody eventually. We need to fill up the left and the center. See, we just move into the right. So
William Julius Wilson is the center?
No.
Who's the center?
The center, he's a centrist.
Yeah, he's probably closest.
I'd like to think that I'm center-left ideologically. Yeah. I mean, Cornell's certainly further to the left than I am.
He certainly is.
But Bill, but don't make me laugh. But Bill and Cornell both describe themselves as progressives, and I'm, 1 foot in the center, 1 foot slightly toward the left. But basically, I'm a centrist.
You are a centrist.
I'm a centrist without it, and I'm proud to be that. That's what I am naturally. But it's different to talk about what we do at Harvard in a classroom or in a debate or in a think tank like the Du Bois Institute, and the power to affect the lives of millions and millions of people that a Supreme Court justice has. And I want to be firmly, while being respectful and not demonizing Clarence Thomas, I want to be firmly opposed to those opinions, which I think do great detriment to the political goals.
So you're saying your argument is against an ideology and a judicial philosophy that is opposed to what you think is in the best interest of the country?
Yeah, like Scalia. I think Scalia is enormously intelligent. I just think he's often wrong. I admire his intelligence. But I think it's incumbent upon me to fight those opinions that I think will work against the larger ends that I would like to see affected. And the largest end is changing the size of the middle class. I'm fascinated with the growth of the stock market right now, and it's quite remarkable. It's astonishing. What will this do for the size of the black middle class? Since King was so brutally killed in 1968, the black middle class has quadrupled, and it doubled between 1982 and 1990 alone. Who was president? Ronald Reagan, right? Mm-hmm. Now, the economy was expanding. We had affirmative action, ironically instituted by Richard Nixon. The black middle class could expand because of that reason, a growth of the economy and affirmative action. Now we have the growth of the economy, and affirmative action is being dismantled. That is why I worry about Clarence Thomas's opinion. I think the boldest thing that the president could do would be to appoint another black person, a center, at least in the center, to the Supreme Court, to dismantle the enormous amount of power that Clarence Thomas has on issues of race.
Well, he's most likely to appoint a Hispanic person, I would bet.
I hope it's a person who's sympathetic to entitlement programs such as affirmative action. Not bad affirmative action, but good subtle kinds of affirmative action.
Louis Farrakhan.
Minister Farrakhan.
You visited in his home. A bit about technique. You want to see them apart from their official place.
That's right. Oh, you mean when I'm doing a piece? I interview everybody but the principal over the telephone. Almost everybody over the telephone. I have this little gadget that hooks in my telephone, you know them. And I have one of the, I'm petrified when I'm doing the piece, and I'm petrified that the tape player won't work. So I have this great tape player that has a voice indicator, lets me know, so I never have to worry about that, so I can relax. I don't have to take notes. It's all being recorded. But for the principal, I want to go to their space. Whether it's it could be their workspace. I interviewed Hillary Clinton in the war room at the White House. General Powell in his study twice. And Minister Farrakhan in his dining room. In his dining room that seats approximately 50 people. For 7 hours. And I was scared to death. I had a terrible cold.
You were scared?
I was scared.
Why?
Well, I mean,
Why?
Minister Farrakhan was serious antagonist. And I had fired a few Scud missiles in his direction.
What was he going to do to you?
I don't know, man. It was just an enormous amount of anxiety. And he didn't look too particularly frightened of me. But I was very nervous about it. I wanted it to work. I didn't know if I'd be frisked when I came in. I didn't know if the Fruit of Islam would give me a hard time. I didn't know anything. And instead, there was virtually, as I say, virtually no bodyguards there or security. And he was immensely charming, very witty, very warm. His wife was very kind to me. His children were very kind to me. He's a smart, quick, well-read, highly intelligent person.
And he has a kind of fatalistic thing about what you and I maybe believe is anti-Semitism, and he believes is this kind of thing with Jews.
It's anti-Semitism. I mean, to me,
no,
there's no
that's what I
question
said. You
about
and
that.
I believe in anti-Semitism, but he doesn't see it that way.
No,
but he sees it as some kind of lockstep he's in.
Mm-hmm. We didn't talk about anti-Semitism or black-Jewish relations for the first approximately 4 hours of the interview. And as soon as I sat down, the first thing he said to me was, congratulations on the department that you guys are putting together at Harvard and on the coup of recruiting William Julius Wilson. So I'm astonished. I didn't even think he would know about
From his town.
That. Yeah. And then he said, but you know, do I want tea? Do I want this? Do I want that? And then he said, we have to get into the Jewish thing. Now, I don't want you to hold back. I don't want you to be intimidated. I don't want you...
You said that or he said that?
He said that. Yeah. He said we have to. But I wanted to try to sneak up on that, to get to know him as a human being first. And then after 4 years, after 4 hours, it seemed like 4 years, I asked him if he still believed, as he said to the assembled editors at the Washington Post in 1990, that he thought that a cabal of Jews ran the world. And he said, and he leaned over intimately, I mean, just almost to touch me, and said, oh yeah, brother, you know, they meet once a month on Park Avenue or in Hollywood. It's a small group of people, and they run the world. Those are the people. But he said it like, it's just us here. Of course you can admit this. This is the way it is. I have intimate knowledge, and I'm going to share it with you, and this is just a fact. Now, you might not like the fact. It might not disturb you, on the other hand, but this is the way it is. That's what the effect that I tried to recreate in the piece was, this is not some guy with horns and bloodshot eyes and ranting and raving. This is a normal, sober, upper-middle-class person who loves his children, who believes in education, who believes ultimately in the capitalist system. I mean, here's a person whose political and economic ideology, sans race, looks like the Republican platform. Here's a person who believes in bootstrap capitalism, black capitalism, a la Richard Nixon, who thinks there's nothing wrong with the system except the system is racist.
Is the victory for civil rights, for the lack of a better word, a consolidation of something?
I think that the victory...
What's needed is, I guess, my question.
The victory will only be achieved when race doesn't matter, as to reverse the title of Cornell's great book. When
race matters.
Race matters. When individual ability, when effort, ambition, energy, etc., matter more than large social constructs like gender, sexual preference, or race. And we're a long way from that.
Is it because of the slavery that it seems to be so...
The difference between the African-American experience and the experience of every other immigrant group is slavery,
And
of
that's
course.
what defines the reason race has such an awful hold on us?
No, but slavery is race and class. Slavery is an economic order justified by race, justified by ethnic difference, color difference, racial difference. Race and class in this country are just like this, except for so long it manifested itself in the form or under the mask of race and racism. Thurgood Marshall turns to Constance Baker Motley and Robert Carter the day of the Brown v. Board decision in 1954 and says within 5 years there won't be any need for civil rights organizations, that the problem of racism will be resolved. That's astonishing. And it's
that he believed, and he was so optimistic. This was 1954.
That's right. He believed that once we got rid of legal or de jure segregation, that all blacks would go plunging headlong into the middle class. I mean, we'd still have some kind of class stratification, but that racism would disappear and the black people essentially would move over into the mainstream.
But do you think then that 75% of the battle is economic and class?
Absolutely.
Getting a piece of the pie.
Sure, but
Get a piece of the pie, and more people see that, the more those racial barriers will...
Yeah, but I don't know if it's 75%. I think that for so long, economic differences masqueraded themselves as racial differences that it's hard now to start to ascertain where one starts and the other stops. So many things manifest themselves as racism when indeed they're about economic scarcity or the fear of economic scarcity, like the war against affirmative action. It's almost as if the right has awakened and realized how many blacks were in the middle class and decided to kick them all out. They said, it's like they say, we don't know how you all got in there.
Do you think that's it?
Oh, yeah.
That the right...
It was easy to be generous about affirmative action in the late 60s when we had an expanding economy and limitless possibilities. Nobody believes in limitless possibilities anymore, not even with the stock market reaching 7,000.
And so to believe that affirmative action has done the best that it can, but it's time to turn to some other alternatives in terms of getting away with racism and creating more opportunity. To believe that the way to go is other than affirmative action is, in your judgment, a view held primarily because somebody's trying to keep somebody else from getting a piece of the pie? That's
the perception, yes.
Perception is different. I'm saying, do you believe that? Or do you believe that's what other people think?
No, I believe that's what other people think, if I'm following your question.
Okay. Right. No, my question was, do you, Skip Gates, believe that the reason people are opposed to affirmative action is because they don't want to see black people get a piece of the economic pie in America?
They don't want to see many more black people get a piece of the economic pie, absolutely.
Because they're fearful of them?
No, because they're afraid there's not enough pie.
So if we give if we provide an opportunity for African Americans to gain a piece of the pie, it's coming out of my mouth.
That's right, and I'm going to be hungry and my children. That idea wasn't around in the late 60s because people thought the pie was big enough for everybody. And no one imagined how successful affirmative action would be for white women.
But then why don't they fear it most on the part of those ethnic groups who are doing very well in America in terms of their assimilation or in terms of a part of the economic pie that they're picking up? It would seem to me that they would be more angry about them because they're doing better at getting a bigger share of the pie.
But they're much, much smaller in numbers. I mean, there are more black Americans than Canadians. 27 million Canadians, 35 million African Americans. And plus we have this...
15% of the population?
I'm not sure what... Just about 12%.
12, okay.
And also we don't have this curious legacy of the dance between these two warring brothers, or brothers and sisters, the black and white Americans, whose dance of death and pain and struggle have really served to create each other. There's no black identity in America without a white identity. There's no white identity without a black identity. They're mutually constitutive. They're mutually
And do you see in black America some animosity towards other minorities who may be taking jobs and opportunities for them, and their hostility is directed towards...
Absolutely. Even look in Boston.
So this is all an economic-based argument for you.
And not all, but it's primarily economic, masquerading itself symbolically at the level of race. Look at the relationship between African Americans of Boston and Haitians, and African Americans other places in relationship to West Indians and Haitians. Enormous jealousy about Haitian economic prosperity.
Speaking of jealousy, are you beginning, because you write for the New Yorker magazine and you write like a dream? I'm not flattering you to tell you that. You know you do. There's nobody writes better profiles in America than you do.
No,
well, it's not. I know.
I have my heroes. People write a lot better. Remnick, David Remnick.
Well, David, I agree. He's a great guest. But I mean,
I call him the Michael Jordan of journalism.
I agree with
that.
Great. I agree. No, I stand corrected.
George Steiner's book reviews. Oh, I wish I could write like that.
Well, but you're up there. I don't quarrel with Remnick as the best.
I'm a worker in the field.
No, you're not. I mean, my point is, are people beginning to say about you at all, you know, Skip is just a little bit too good. He's a little too smooth. He's a little too... Any of that?
Well, not to my face.
You feel any...
Now, most people have been very kind about...
the fact that you have built this great department at Harvard and recruited these wonderful scholars, the fact that you write for the magazine, the fact that you publish these books, the fact that you're a popular speaker, the fact that publishers are lining up to publish your books.
Well, I've had a lot of support from a lot of people and a lot of encouragement, and I try to be supportive of other efforts, and you can only do the best that you can do to make people like you. You can't make people like you. And I guess there are always, someone who's successful like Vernon Jordan or Toni Morrison or Cornel West or Carl Lewis. I'm sure that they encounter some sort of resistance from some quarters, but generally, I try not to mess with people. I try not to hurt anybody. I don't even write bad tender letters for people, man. I just won't write. But in general, the danger in my position is that as an academic, will my journalistic activity be perceived as being unprofessional? Will it be seen as embarrassing Harvard or not living up to my scholarly responsibilities. And I'm pleased to say that my colleagues at Harvard, and this was the great fear I had, if you want me to be honest, that my colleagues at Harvard...
I do want you to be honest, sir.
Well, that they would find it somehow unseemly or something that
was your fear.
Yeah.
You were worried about that idea.
Oh,
It's
sure.
too popular makes me seem less of an academic.
That's right. And there's always been a tension between popularizers, so-called, and, you know, quote-unquote pure academics. And what I try to do is take the insights from my literary training, my academic training, and put them in a language that's accessible. And I try to use devices from fiction. I mean, it's the cheat. I mean, to me, I've always wanted to be a novelist, deep down. I think many critics are frustrated, either novelists or poets or dramatists. And I can attempt to use some of the devices of fiction in these profiles. And I feel very comfortable doing them, though I'm petrified each time I get a call from Tina Brown or get a green light for something that I've thought of, about starting all over and having to do one of those profiles. And I'm petrified because it all depends, each of these profiles depends upon the interviews that I do. I'll interview 40 or 50 or 60 people for each of these pieces. I just published the Chitlin Circuit. It took me 3.5 months to do that piece. And I had to fly around the country and look at Chitlin Circuit plays and then decide where my metaphor was, how to focus on it.
About August Wilson and all that.
Yeah, and then, but the piece is arrived at inductively. It comes from the interviews. It's called reporting a piece. I have had to learn how to report a piece. I've also had to learn how to write a profile. And how I did that was I started reading profiles, and an editor there gave me a copy of a brilliant profile written by Andrea Lee of an Italian publishing figure. And I read that profile. I exercise every day on the treadmill. And I kept that profile on my treadmill for a week, and I read it, and I read it, and read it, so I could memorize the structure, figure out how does she move from the beginning to the middle to the end. I think I'd do a slightly different thing, but it gave me a language to begin to try, a scaffolding, to begin to try to paint.
Well, when you do it as well as you do, to flatter you again, it is always it is always sort of comforting to people out there who are writing to hear that someone looks at structure and looks at other people and who approaches it, in a sense, from a standpoint of how is this done? What's the process of making this work? Rather than simply sitting down and it just flows out of you.
Oh, are you crazy?
You know.
No, I said a lot of drafts have produced that. I mean, for all their limitations, it takes a lot of drafts. But it also takes overcoming an enormous amount of anxiety, and that's where I found exercise to be helpful. You stress out with a busy life, and then trying to, make time to do all this work.
Speaking of all this, you have spoken to this point. Is there a great piece of art to come out of the Simpson obsession?
I think that a novel written by the right person, someone with enough distance and sensitivity, about the reaction.
It's that rather than a play, rather than a movie, rather than something. It begins with a work of fiction.
I mean, I hadn't thought about it that much till you asked me, but novels what leapt from my lips, so I guess that's what I expect. I think there will be bad movies made. If you could get John Sayles to do a movie, or someone like that, that would be, that could be quite something. But I don't know what form it will take. I think it's going to take a while for us to figure out what's actually happened with the Simpson event. And I don't think that the Simpson case is over. I mean, I think the legal dealings are over, but I mean, the tremendous pressure that OJ Simpson must now be under, and how he is in a deep state of denial, from my point of view.
Has been.
And what will happen to him, I think, is, I think that we have not heard the last of the tragedies surrounding this case.
No, I don't either. 13 Ways of Looking at a Black Man, Henry Louis Gates, Jr. An interesting insight into fascinating people. You'll learn a lot more about them. You'll understand what makes them tick, and you'll understand some of the dilemmas that these black men face in their lives. Harry Belafonte and Colin Powell and a lot of other people, some dead, some still alive, a reflection of some of the issues today that confront this country. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time.